with any connected health behavior, whether it could be taking your medication, it could be rehab, it could be a number of things. If you know you're being watched, you behave differently.
Hello, and welcome to Rehab Remix, the podcast that explores the future of orthopedic rehab within the construct of clinical innovation and connected health. I'm Rohit Nayak, co-founder of Band Connect, your host for this series. In each segment, we will feature discussions with practitioners and clinicians, but we will also bring in other stakeholders such as administrators, industry leaders, researchers, each of whom are playing a role in helping advance a healthier future. I'm delighted to have you join us as listeners in our inaugural series and encourage you to engage and participate in helping us together advance orthopedic rehab and rehab in general. In this segment, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Joe Kvedar, professor of dermatology at Harvard Medical School. Most of us know Joe as a pioneer in telemedicine with his leadership activities in this field spanning over 30 years. His list of credentials is long. He's probably defined the term connected health, in my opinion, and the many terms that have followed since. So, yes, he definitely has a bird's eye perspective on where things are and perhaps also where they're going. Beyond all of this, he's a kind and generous individual from which I have benefited greatly as well. Joe, welcome and thanks for being here. I was wondering if you could kick us off by providing some context of how you got started in what we're now calling telemedicine, your passion as a clinical innovator, and perhaps as you do that, perhaps also give us and the audience some insights into what you're doing today.
Well, thanks, Rohit. I'm delighted to be part of it. You're right, it's been a long journey. It was in the early to mid 1990s. And I sometimes use the analogy of the films being John Malkovich getting off between the 11th and the 12th floor, if anyone remembers that. I was in the middle of a career change and I stumbled into this world. I became an accidental tourist in the land of connected health. I'm not a computer scientist, I'm not an informatician, but I've always appreciated what technology could do to make my life better. And that's kind of what drove me. The other thing that drove me in the very beginning, which and part of the reason I'm still doing this, is because it hasn't really been solved yet, which is this idea that we're really not hitting the nail on the head when it comes to our mix of how we apply resources to care delivery. There's far too much demand for services compared to the supply of people delivering those services, and we still, for the majority of time, people come to some physical location to be with another person to get something done, and that's not a model, as we all know from other services around us. That's not a model that scales at all. So I've been pushing that boulder up the hill for most of that time as well. For 25 years, I oversaw the activities, what's now called Mass General Brigham, and most of that was really just doing innovative work. There were a couple of system-wide programs, but it was mostly working with innovators and proving out new technologies, doing a lot of clinical validation work. And then did a pretty major pivot in late 2019. I now spend my time, I still see patients a couple days a week. I also am editor in chief at Nature Digital Medicine, which is a growing journal and really growing rapidly. And so it's requiring more and more of my time, but it's time really well spent. I co chair the AMA's Digital Medicine Payment Advisor Group. So that always, everyone gets really excited when they hear that I know something about digital medicine reimbursement in the States. And then I work a bit with the ATA on things like content for their conferences, and I'm the host of their podcast. So a few things that I do for Ann at the ATA, and it all adds up to about a full-time job, but it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. And thank you very much for carving some time to be with us here today. I know you've seen Band Connect since our inception many years ago, and our emphasis on the blended care model that focuses on leveraging the clinician-driven in-clinic experience to drive more patient accountability, particularly with their home exercise therapy. We've been calling it hybrid rehab for some time, and it feels now that it's resonating with our clinical audience as more and more folks are now talking about hybrid. I know there are many definitions to what is called hybrid or hybrid rehab. But what are your perspectives on this and just from a clinical practice standpoint?
Well, I've told you from the start that it's a great space that you're in, and there's so much that needs to be done there. So I've always been excited about what you're doing at Band Connect for that reason. I had a couple of orthopedic injuries over the years. You go visit a physical therapist, and they give you this program, usually written on a piece of paper or typed on a piece of paper. And you're expected to go home and do all this stuff on your own. And life gets in the way, and you might do half of it, you might do less than half. Some people, I guess, do it all. But we all know that how well your injury recovers depends on how well you do that activity. So it just has always made sense to me that we should be doing a lot of this under either remote supervision or in the context of motivational software or any number of things. And you're not the first people in the industry to think of doing this, but there have been a lot of failures along the way because people designed things that just weren't ready for prime time. I think the combination that you have now of having sensors that measure things that can feed back into a database that informs a physical therapist how well you're doing. We all know, for instance, that, and this is work that we did when I was running a research team, that if with any connected health behavior, whether it could be taking your medication, it could be rehab, it could be a number of things. If you know you're being watched, you behave differently. So the fact that your devices and your systems are enabling a remote PT person to be aware of what's going on in the home just changes the game for the rehab process. And I think when you talk about rehab since the pandemic, when for 3 months we did everything virtually, we learned a lot about the limits of
Yeah.
that. And so the idea that we have this mixture of in person care and care that's outside of the care setting, probably in the home in this case, delivered with these tools, it's clearly the next wave.
Yep. Yep. And I don't know if you remember, but you were the first person that clued us in about remote therapeutic monitoring as a CPT code some years back. I
Yeah,
know that's one of the many activities that you partake in as well within the CPT
right.
committees there. So I don't know how much you can share, but what are your thoughts on how that has gone, how that is evolving, and anything you can share on that front?
So yes, this was I referenced the AMA Digital Medicine Payment
Yeah.
Advisor Group. So among the things that's been an 8-year assignment, we're actually in the process of reforming what that group does as we speak. But I'm still involved and creating reimbursement codes for coding what we called coding gaps in digital payment was the reason the committee existed. And we've no work is ever done, but we've done quite a bit in that space now. So that's why we're reimagining the work of that group. In 2020, because these things have a couple of years of lag time before they see the light of day, we had already done remote physiologic monitoring codes, which are things like blood pressure cuffs and weight scales and physical devices. Someone said, with mobile apps, a lot of the monitoring can be done with software. And that's how remote therapeutic monitoring codes came about. They chose musculoskeletal, respiratory, and then later on added mental health as 3 areas that you could use for RTM codes. Each code set has a code that enables the prescriber of the activity to get reimbursed if there's, for instance, if there's a software, let's say it's the Band Connect app and they're prescribing it, then someone, perhaps an insurer, would pay for it and the physician could get some of that money. The second is to educate the patient on how to use the thing. And then the third is to evaluate the data coming in. Now, in an orthopedic practice, it's a doctor overseeing a physical therapist to do that, but the codes allow for that. And how's it gone? Well, RPM, which was released in 2019, is now and there was perhaps you and your listeners saw that the Peterson Health Technology Institute just did a report on this, not for not specific to physical rehab, but more to diabetes and hypertension. And it's grown quite a bit. There's some concern, just a little footnote on the RPM side, there's some concern of people, maybe not, maybe some fraud and abuse. So that's being looked at. RTM has grown, but much less slowly. Could that be because it started later, so we only have 2 years of data? Not sure. If we look at the adoption curves, it's tracking pretty similarly to
Mhm.
RPM. But remember, RPM was going along, and then we had the pandemic, so all that COVID monitoring got fit into
Yep.
RPM. So I'm not sure we can directly compare the two, but it is growing.
Yeah. From our vantage point, two things. So, one is that we're certainly seeing an uptick of that. We can segment our audience into different buckets, and I can say that the health system based groups are a little slower in adopting those codes, but the other segments are certainly amongst our customer base that are leveraging it. And it's a perfect fit for a largely fee for service sort of an environment to start
Yep.
talking about the holistic view of a patient. And it's funny, from our standpoint, we're seeing two things. Certainly, there are those that are focused on the additional revenue, but they're an equal subset of folks who are really passionate about what they do from a care delivery standpoint and want to follow that on. So we're seeing a good mix of it, and it'll probably evolve as well. Are there other sort of delivery models, clinical innovation models that you're seeing that people are talking about that you'd like to share with us?
Well, we were talking off camera about a project that I'm working on. I published a book in 2015 called The Internet of Healthy Things. So it's 10-year anniversary now, and I'm going back chapter by chapter to analyze kind of what we were thinking about and how accurate we were in our predictions. There's a few angles to it. Some of the companies have come and gone, so what's happened to them? Some of the people we interviewed have gone and done other things, etc. How does that relate to your question? Because a big theme in that book was that we're going to be moving towards value-based reimbursements in a big way, and that's going to move also telehealth into the mainstream. And it really didn't happen that way. Yes, there's more value-based reimbursement, but not to the tune that was predicted. And there's some sectors where it's, I would say, on the wane. I think there are some organizations, for instance, that signed up to be accountable care organizations that are moving more towards the medical shared savings plan, which is just less of a risk for the provider. And Medicare Advantage is, I think, as of next year, going to drop off completely their value based arrangements. So it's a mix and it's not gone as I had hoped. The other point that I made recently in a blog post is that even if it was to happen, it didn't drag in the connected health stuff the way I thought
Yeah.
it would. So this is why I'm happy. Again, I have the benefit of hindsight now, but in 2017, when the AMA asked me if I would be part of this group to build these codes, I said yes, and I'm happy I did now because, frankly, the only, not only, but the major adoption for any of these remote monitoring telehealth scenarios has been because we created reimbursement codes for them. So my dream didn't come true in one way, in one way it
Great.
did because telehealth is mainstream now, but in a different way than we thought. So that's that one that's been on my mind. I think the other thing that I haven't seen take full traction and we dreamed about is this idea that because you basically nowadays can generate a digital twin of yourself with all the data that's coming off of your wearables and your mobile device and your EHR and all that. And of course, we're better than ever now in capturing that data and interdigitating it into something that makes sense. Our thought was that we would have scenarios where health plans would say, gee, Rohit, I don't think you're quite doing your wellness thing well enough. We're going to raise your premiums. And that hasn't happened. And that's probably because people are so darned angry about
Right.
privacy. Health plans have raised everyone's premium and then give you a discount if you're
That's right.
healthy. So You know, that has happened, but the idea that they would say to you, "Well, we see that you've signed up to do all this stuff and you're not going to the gym, you're not getting your 10,000 steps," hasn't happened. So again, that was another thing that we kind of dreamed about because we thought these wearable devices can really hold you accountable. If you're motivated, you don't need anyone but the wearable because you generate the data and you react to it.
Yeah,
But if you're not motivated per se, then it's almost like a distraction to have your step count in front of you every day. So those are a couple of things that didn't
yeah,
happen. Of course, the big thing that is happening and will happen and how we wrestle with it and what comes out of it is artificial intelligence,
yeah.
particularly
I was
generative
going to bring
artificial
that up.
intelligence.
We can't have a conversation these days without bringing that up.
Yeah, really. I think I put it in the same context, again, having been at this now for over 30 years, I put it in the same context as the iPhone, and not just the iPhone, but the user interface that Apple created that was quickly adopted by Google, Android. So now every mobile phone has this very easy to
Yeah,
understand, and it's in the palm of your hand, and it's a network, and it's the camera, and so on. That was an enormous move forward. And I think generative AI is similarly that way because it just has this sort of, oh my God, it's like magic, right? You ask this thing questions and it generates interesting answers, not always right, sometimes wrong references, etc. You got to check everything, but they'll figure that out. And you have these things now called agents that are supposed to mash these things to do, almost like they're thinking.
yeah,
So yes, that is something to watch very carefully. I try my best to spend an hour or two a week learning something new about AI because I just feel like it's going to be so core to everything we do that you ought to know a little bit about it.
yeah. No, absolutely. We've been fascinated a few decades back. And I can tell you, I'm highly impressed with what I'm seeing. And we're leveraging some of it for Band Connect and particularly in areas around patient engagement. I think the
Mhm.
crux of what we're doing, independent of all the technology and everything else, is we're increasing that level of engagement between the clinician and the patient, independent of care setting, in that
Right.
continuous basis. And we feel as if that's at the foundation of driving more accountability. And because I am one of those non-compliant patients too, as you know, it's
Yeah, we all are to a certain extent. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, for our listeners over here, Joe referenced some of the blog posts that he's doing. Please look them up. They're a fun read. He's doing a honest comparison with some of the data points that he referenced in his book 10 years ago. So if you haven't done that already, please look him up.
My name, joekvedar.com, Kvedar, joekvedar.com, and there's access to all my stuff there.
Excellent. So going forward, then, just sort of trying to look ahead, and you're engaging with a lot of others that we could call thought leaders, leaders who are making change on a daily basis. And so, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are your expectations around this whole notion of virtual care? And before you get into it, I just wanted to share on the rehab side, we are seeing innovation happen in the 100% virtual category, as not for the core sort of rehab experience, but what happens before the rehab experience starts and also what happens after. Those seem to be natural endpoints where you could have an extension on either side of the equation.
Well, again, we're just back to the artificial intelligence world because that really is the hot topic. I'll just share one story. For many years, when people come to me and ask me for advice about putting products into the market that are in the digital health space, I will oversimplify and say, if you're selling into health systems, you're either going to make us money, increase our revenue, or save us money somehow, maybe by making us more efficient. The latter being a much more difficult
Yes.
sell because CFOs like revenue.
Yeah.
That's here. And so, why do I mention that? Is because the idea that we can use some of these technologies to be more efficient is starting to catch hold. And I'm sure have scenarios
Absolutely. Yeah.
that you're using when you chat with potential customers and investors about how you can make, the old proverbial 1 + 1 = 3 in terms of the rehab market.
Absolutely.
And that's happening in other spaces as well. So You look at the reason I mentioned the AI before is because that is one of the things that can automate things, make more efficient. I still haven't figured out the roadmap. So, for instance, having just said all that, I'm going to kind of contradict myself now because the outlier thing that just popped into our system and I think is catching the world by storm is ambient scribing in the doctor's
Yeah.
office. I think the main company is called Abridge. There's probably three or four others, and they would be angry at me for mentioning Abridge, but they're getting a lot of
Yeah.
press. And we just signed big contracts with, I think, at least two of them across our system, pure expense. So throw away my business model because it's helping clinicians. I guess it's helping them be more
Yeah.
efficient, but it's making them more happy mostly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but it's just the notion that it's straightforward to, as I say, bring us in revenue, compete with an MRI machine, right? If I lease one of those, I know we're going to make money. So think about that as the investment you're competing with.
Yeah.
But increasingly now, and I think this translates again, thinking of the rehab world, you've got the certainly the health plan space is getting more and more interested in this sort of thing. And anything to do with workman's comp, this will bleed into that. But the idea that you can use this hybrid rehab concept to maybe PTs can do more with less, more patients get better quicker. And all of that should add up to a lot of opportunity, not just for revenue growth, but for efficiency as
Oh,
well.
yeah, absolutely. And certainly from a Band Connect standpoint, our entire value proposition, we spent years now building the clinical foundation and the evidence. So we're at the point right now where we can tell that story. But the value proposition beyond that is all about revenue enhancements. And it's not just RTM, it's many other aspects as well.
Right.
One of the aspects that we're seeing as we get deeper and deeper into understanding orthopedic rehab or physical therapy, we're learning about their circumstance. No surprise, reduced reimbursements, increased costs, lower margins, so an industry segment under pressure, no question. But one of the things that we're seeing is that through what we're doing, we're allowing the clinician the opportunity to actually do what they've been trained for,
Yeah.
which is be more analytical and less transactional. Because now you have that holistic picture of that patient. You have a more engaged
Right.
patient. And we think that that's almost as important as all these other things that we're talking about because these are passionate individuals, yourself included, care about what they're doing, have spent a lot of time and money becoming an expert in their field. And so we're feeling pretty good about that because that adds an element that we hadn't quite anticipated.
Excellent.
Yeah. Any one big takeaway that you can share with us as we close out our session here today?
Well, I often get asked about telehealth in the pandemic. And I usually say the good news, it's tough to ascribe good news to the pandemic, but the good news relevant to telehealth is that now every patient really knows what that means. And almost every doctor has done it. So it's one less thing that you have to explain. When I say to a patient, do you want to do your follow up by virtual visit? They don't look at me like I have three
Yeah.
heads. They would say, what are you talking
Yeah.
about? But the other is the fact that we did everything that way and people in some ways got the times that there were failures because that person should have been in the office somehow got blamed on the technology.
Yeah.
Not the technology's fault. The person using it didn't use it wisely. Telehealth is mainstream now. It's used for a lot of things. There's a lot of fun little niches popping up. But we also have to go back and re-examine when something like, and again, I go back to your company. The analogy would be if you had people do their exercise at home and just verbally report on
Yeah.
it. You have the device for a reason, right?
Yeah.
It adds in a data stream that makes it critical. So we have these tools. We can do a lot with them. We're only probably 10% of our capabilities, but that's why it's exciting to stay involved.
Yep. Well, Well, Joe, I want to thank you for engaging in this discussion and more importantly, for all the groundbreaking work that you have done and continue to do, forging your pathway forward. Thank you very much.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you today, Rohit. Thank you.
Thanks. You've been listening to Rehab Remix, produced by Band Connect. I'm Rohit Nayak, inviting you to join us next time as we continue our journey together in what we like to call the hybrid rehab revolution. We think it's real. Please follow us and subscribe to our Band Connect channel. Thank you.